Hello everyone, I'm Bernardo, also known as Raptus Games, a solo developer from Chile. After almost 10 years of production, on October 1st, 2024, I released my first solo developed game on Steam, NBB.exe, and this is the story of how it came to be. First, let me tell you a little bit about myself. You should know that while I'm arguably a beginner, I have published several games and worked in the gaming industry for over a decade. Previously, I have developed and released games for PS4, PS Vita, and phones with varying levels of success. I've also worked on tools for different engines and produced graphic design for a few other games. So while I'm not an authority in game development, I do have a fair bit of experience in both production and publishing. I think everyone knows how difficult it is to make a game, but not a lot of people actually understand the different steps required to release a game. So with this video I'm hoping to present my game and my creative process, but also demystify the practical aspects of making a game and publishing it. I won't go into too granular detail here though, so if you want more specific information about coding, art, design, game engines, or any part of the production, let me know and I might make some follow-up videos or devlogs if you're interested. The origins of NBB. NBB.exe was originally a student project for when I was studying programming in Australia back in 2011. Back then, the game was called Bomber Woman, but we obviously had to change the name. And it was a 2D top-down multiplayer arena game. It was actually an assignment. We needed to recreate a classic arcade game, but I obviously went a little bit overboard and added radial shockwaves and players that could jump over these shockwaves. Sadly, that prototype got lost to time in one of my old hard drives, and all that's left is this original logo. I still think it looks pretty cool. The game was so fun that people ended up playing it outside our assignment, and even now, my classmates have pretty fond memories of it. Back in 2015, when we actually started working on it though, my friend Sam Mummery was part of Raptus, and it was actually his idea to remake the original project and get a small game out there to make a name for our studio. Naturally, I spent the following decade putting it out. Sadly, early in the project, Sam had to exit Raptus due to life circumstances, so I was presented with the question of, like, should I continue with this game, or maybe I should do something else solo? I ended up deciding to continue, although the game changed a fair bit. The bomb grows. Any developer will tell you, don't spend too much time on a single project. And they're all correct, because the iteration helps you improve and keeps your skills current. But it also diminishes the risk of catastrophic failures, because if a 6-month project bombs, it was only half a year. But when you've spent 5 or more years in a project, your early mistakes start showing up, and it becomes harder and harder to solve them. And more importantly, a bomb can really crush you both monetarily and emotionally because you've put all your eggs in that one basket. But I don't want to get ahead of myself. The thing is, if I was gonna make this game on my own, I wanted to enjoy it, and my favorite thing about games is puzzles and exploration. I'm interested in level design and having creative progression systems, and I found really difficult to explore all of those things in a couch competitive arena game. So, long story short, I feature crept a whole ass campaign into the game. First it was a few levels as an alternative to the versus modes, but then it became lore, then there were a few secrets, then there were more levels, there were more secrets and more lore, and eventually I had 2 campaigns, one linear and one secondary that took the player through a much harder challenge to reach a true ending. By 2018, after working years on the game just by myself part-time, the versus mode was just a tiny sliver of the game. What can I say? Getting lost and solving puzzles is my kink. Luckily, most of my full-time jobs allowed me to spend a lot of time on my own projects, and I spent almost all my spare time deep in development, finishing a game. People say that the last 10% of any project is actually 90% of the work. I'm no scientist, don't tell my parents, but it sounds about right. The last 4 years of development at NBB.exe seemed like the goal was constantly sliding away. The game was functionally finished, but the lack of interest from publishers and testers pushed me to iterate further and further. More and more features got added, and many of them were clear and exciting improvements, but each one added new challenges and new bugs that made the testing even more complicated, and it was a constant cycle of updating the game over and over again. And through this whole time, I was constantly in talks with ID at Xbox and potential publishers, but nothing ever really came from that. That's what taught me that platform holders are not your friends. Decades earlier, when talking with Microsoft and Sony, indie games felt like a much more important market. They seemed to be a big differentiation between their consoles. But that was before mobile games and Game Pass. I feel like nowadays, indie games are literally a dime a dozen, and unless a big publisher gets behind a game, very few people care. That's why instead of providing you with a development kit for a nominal fee, or even for free as they used to, they have now gone back to charging a fairly steep licensing fee. At least for an indie, it can be pretty heavy. In the same way, engines require specific licenses to publish to consoles. So Unity requires a Pro license, which costs about $180 a month or $2,000 a year, and it all adds up. Given the amount of games that come out every day, this is understandable, because the issue is visibility, but it's not good for indies. It's really screwing us over. And this is also why I know that publishers are not your friends. So I know, the lack of interest from publishers should have been an immediate red flag for my game. But it is very clear, publishers will almost exclusively show interest in things that are very literal. Deck builders, roguelikes, cozy games, horror, automatic shooters, mashups of those genres, or games from studios that are already familiar. Something that's been established already. All of these have better chances of getting picked up, and anything with a more defined niche is easier to sell. And I was confident on my game, so this was not gonna deter me. The true ending. Of course, there was always the temptation of just releasing the game as it was years ago. But I don't know if it was sunk cost fallacy or just me actually believing that the game was good and wanting to honor that. I still believe that the game is actually very good. In the end, I kept working on it until I actually felt that the game was complete and it was telling the story that I wanted to tell. This is nice and all, but developers don't recommend it for a reason. Polishing, adding details, fixing significant bugs took me over 2 years, and no one can assure you that a time investment like that will pay off. In my case, NBB.exe is a passion project, but it's not my livelihood, so I can take some risks that other developers couldn't. This is why I knowingly decided to do it, but I'm not sure I would recommend it for other developers. Finally, by late 2023, I actually felt happy with the state of NBB.exe and started making preparations. Beta tests, trailers, demos, marketing material, emails, every part of it seems like a small task, but it all adds up. And I honestly hate marketing. I wish a game could just live and die of its quality, but the truth is that there's so many competitive games out nowadays, it's almost impossible to coast on quality. You need to get your name out there. And I learned that the hard way. Due to a low response rate from the press and the usual required bug fixing close to launch, the new date of June 2024 had to be postponed once again. I was honestly feeling pretty burnt out by then, and I really wanted to see this through. That's why even though my game was not finished, I pushed to get my demo into the July Steam Next Fest 2024. And the results were middling, but generally positive. The thing is, 1,000 wishlists sounds like a decent result, but it was far from the 7,000 to 10,000 that most developers recommend for launching a game. Why are wishlist numbers so important? Long story short, Steam's algorithm prioritizes games with more wishlist numbers. It uses those numbers to surface them in their lists and recommendations for every player. And for indies, the popular upcoming list is particularly important for visibility. If it isn't there, most players won't ever see an indie game, unless they search for it by name, but nobody's searching for a name that they don't know. So, 7,000 to 10,000 is a general approximation of the numbers required for a game to make it to the front page. It all depends on what other games are doing around the same time, and if you're releasing in a very popular moment, you might require even higher numbers. In any case, I was confident about my game. And even though I was almost 5,000 wishlists under the recommendations, I decided to launch my game anyway. I simply didn't want to keep kicking this ball forward forever, so I set a fixed deadline of October 1st, 2024. And that's how this went. So I guess a little self-promotion never hurt anyone, so I hope you'll indulge me if I showcase a bit of my game. Honestly though, I also think it's important to explain my design process when it came to the final form of NBB.exe. You should also know that there may be some slight spoilers about the game here. Nothing major, but if you're already interested, you can skip this section and come back when you've already played it. As it reads in the Steam description, NBB.exe is a fast-paced puzzle platformer inspired by Bomberman, with a good dose of Metroidvania exploration. And that's basically what it is, at least on the surface. The system is a future world where robots enjoy the sport of neon blast battling. Each cycle, Neon Industries organizes a new tournament and bombers enter the arena to be tested. Only the best bomber can release and become an NBB superstar. This is every bomber's dream. And now it's your turn. Never mind the glitches or the corruption or the disgruntled robot workers, Neon Industries has it all under control. Everything is perfectly normal as long as you keep bombing. Anyway, when it came to the game, these were my design directives. First, I wanted a familiar concept. On one side, this would attract players that might be interested in Bomberman. But I also wanted to harness the limitations of classic games with these constrained mechanics to inspire the game design and the level production. 2. A unique look. Personally, I wanted to differentiate NBB from other indie games that often fall into very familiar aesthetics. We've seen so many games with low poly graphics or pixel art design, and they're all very skillful, and they can be quite beautiful, but they do blend together often, and it's harder to differentiate yourself in that space. So I thought that something a little bit more elaborate could work well. 3. Charming characters. My purpose was for each of the bombers to have a cute, distinctive aesthetic. For example, Neon represents perseverance, and her sporty sort of girl next door design is supposed to reflect that. On the other hand, Shiver is ruthless, and her design is supposed to look cold and stern. Adira clearly represents elegance. Her lines are much more simple than the rest of the bombers, and her general demeanor inspires opulence and luxury. Gia's green energy is supposed to evoke an earthly strength. Her silhouette is inspired by football players' uniforms, so you can see this in her. And lastly, Amp is supposed to be optimistic. She's rounded, she's bubbly, and she's really happy to be here. And while all of these bombers are a little bit cutesy in some ways, I intentionally avoided going with a chibi art style so that the players could take the world and the characters a little bit more seriously. These may be stylized robot girls, but I always tried to keep them relatable. And for all the other robots to have a comedic but thoughtful writing that didn't undermine the story. For that, I pushed a pretty big dose of black comedy because it allowed me to play around with jokes, but still keep a somewhat unsettling undertone. Four, a simple execution. I didn't want to bog down the player with a lot of mechanical complications or difficult button presses. And I also wanted to avoid a complex progression and instead focus on giving the players creative ways to use their available skills. 5. A precise progressive challenge. Using the simple execution that I just mentioned, I try to apply it in creative ways. This allowed me to self-balance the difficulty depending on the player's skill. Starting with the somewhat controversial roll after a dash that many people hated, that allowed me to prevent the player from jumping and dashing the whole time, to more specific advanced techniques like bomb kicking using iframes, dash, jump cancelling, and chain dashing for very specific challenges. This would also work with the different paths through the game. I wanted to assure that players could choose how much they wanted to engage with the game. Obviously, the deeper the players would go, the more specific the skill requirements would be to progress, and the harder the game would become. 6. Providing a difficult experience while limiting the frustration. This was probably one of the hardest challenges that I had developing the game, because even though I wanted this game to be very hard, I never wanted the player to feel too frustrated, so I implemented a number of measures to make sure that the players would still feel like there was some progression being made. For that, I implemented forgiving checkpoints that were very constant, and they would assure that players wouldn't have to repeat too much content to get to where they were. I also tried to make the respawn times very quick and remove all lives or scores or any other concerns that would maybe give the players negative reinforcement. And that way they could focus on a very condensed execution of the requirements. Players would only need to learn and execute a small segment of each level or each boss. 7. A unique setting. Even though I know that there's nothing really new under the sun, I wanted to create a virtual environment that felt grounded, vibrant, and interesting even with my limited resources. For this I had many inspirations, but I tried very hard not to fall into stylistic cliches, so I didn't want it to be like an anime game or like a Tron game or a very dark sci-fi universe. I wanted it to be its own thing, and I am pretty happy with the way that the game looks. 8. Deceptively in-depth lore and story. As I mentioned before, exploration and puzzles are my favorite things in games, but I also love uncovering a narrative. And that's why, just like with the challenge, I wanted to provide a flexible approach to the narrative. Some players may be satisfied with a straightforward cyber sports competition story, just complete every level and finish the game, while other players might be interested in going down the rabbit hole of secrets to find the much darker places where the story leads. While I feel like I was mostly successful with those points, through the reception of the game, I found a lot of ways in which I could have improved the communication of these concepts, just so that the players would have had a more informed expectation of the game. This is what I've learned. Sadly but expectedly, NBB has not recovered its production cost, not even remotely, and it's unlikely it ever will. I'm mostly okay with that, probably. And while I truly believe that many things are simply bad luck, I do think that there's lessons to be learned from my experience. First, most players have no patience unless they expect it. RPG games can expect patient players because they want to get into the story and they want to read your tutorials. Souls players expect to face some level of frustration. But cute puzzle platformers that are presented as action adventures don't inspire the same expectations. That means most players won't read or follow tutorials, and most players won't follow subtle hints, which is the reason why many AAA games use the infamous yellow paint. It is actually very hard to direct players to solve problems in ways that they are not expecting. And for that same reason, genres matter. On Steam, puzzle platformers are very unpopular and famously difficult to sell. Now, roguelikes, card games, horror games, and cozy games tend to be the ones that have a wider audience. And the thing I realized is that games are like porn, and you have to sell what your game is. No one likes surprise genres in porn. Perverts want to get exactly what they searched for. Unexpected is only acceptable if the surprise is complementary to the requested genre. This is why, if you're a developer, you should define the base game clearly and market that game accordingly. If you look at games like Tunic, Neon White, Celeste, Inscription, all these games are pretty surprising in their own way, but they always sell directly what they are first. And as much as I hate marketing, your game is a marketing project, and you need to make it shine. One of the hardest things that I learned is that Steam may be a necessary evil. Very few people know this, but at launch, NBB.exe was free for 3 days on itch.io. My original plan was to do the same discount on Steam, following the successful campaign that Content Warning had launched with. However, Steam didn't allow this for me, saying that they only conducted deals like that with established publishers, and not nobodies like me. Even worse, I spent a lot of time making sure that NBB was playable on the Steam Deck. Yet, the official certification tool, which allows you to get your game rated for compatibility on the Steam Deck, is only available for limited publishers, meaning that there's nothing I could do to get NBB certified for Steam Deck. It still isn't, even though it runs. This absolutely sucks, and Steam sucks for it. But Steam is the only platform that matters on PC. To demonstrate this, no one has bought NBB.exe from itch.io. It's the same game, and it's almost half the price. Yet, there are no sales. I hate it, and I have so many problems with this ecosystem. But sadly, my advice for new developers is to act as if Steam is the only computer platform, because nothing else works. Just as a regular rule, Steam requires a fee of $100 per property that you want to release. This doesn't mean every single product, but the whole family of products. This assures that publishers aren't just flooding the store with trash, supposedly. I'm not actually sure if this is working though. Or maybe it's that gamers are actually just buying trash, making it worthwhile. Steam also takes 30% of any earning, meaning that if a game sells for $1,500, you will only get a bit over $1,000. This is the industry standard, so it's hard to complain, but it still stings a little bit considering other storefronts are charging 10% or even less. Monopolies are real fun, huh? The worst part is that I still don't know how to break through to the press. I really wish I had more information here, because I tried everything. I hired a PR firm, I paid for trailers on YouTube, I sent hundreds of emails to different press outlets and YouTubers, but the truth is that I utterly failed at making people care about NBB.exe, and I still struggle to understand what gets picked and what gets ignored. This makes me feel like we need a better system, a better way to get in touch with players and with the press. And yes, I'm including YouTubers as well. That said, I have to specifically thank Misspelled Moose, because their video was the only review of my game that actually took the time to discover what was available in NBB.exe, and they showcased it beautifully. I will link his channel in the description. Go watch his stuff, because it's actually really cool. It's all very well produced and extremely thoughtful. In the end. Well, NBB.exe is out now. At least it's released on Steam. And while I'm exploring the option of releasing on consoles, I'm not sure it would be the best time investment. So at least now I plan to rest and we'll see. Sadly, this ends in a bit of a bittersweet note, I know, because while I'm very proud of NBB, and I truly believe that it's a good game, it's undeniably a commercial failure, and my dreams of full-time game dev are still not a reality. I do appreciate how much I've learned from it though. And from this experience, I have charted a pretty exciting path ahead that will hopefully allow me to put more games out there. That's what I want to do, and I won't stop. I also really have to thank friends and family who allowed me and helped me to accomplish this achievement, because surprisingly, game devs are not the easiest folk to be around when there's bugs happening. But in any case, thank you all so much for watching. If you have any questions or comments, just let me know. If you want me to post more in-depth things, specific things, technical things, you'll find my links in the description and you can get in touch. Anyway, keep bombing because tomorrow was yesterday.